The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
John Bellatieri was 26 years old when he was murdered.
I do know that John did get into angel dust, and I do believe that this was a drug-related murder.
Whoever did this is a son of a bitch.
My mother is ill, and I would love for her to have some answers before she passes.
Real families, real stories. From Lasting Media, I'm Jason B. Jones, and this is Season 2 of Knock Knock, the unsolved murder of John Bellatieri. Listen to Knock Knock now on Podcast One or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our look into the death of Ellen Greenberg. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Barrett, and I'm joined, as always, by my splendid co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. Thanks for calling me splendid.
Hi,
I am quite certain you've never called me that before.
Well, if I called you that last week, just know that is how splendid you are. You're splendid squared. But
Well, you're splendid. You are so splendid because you have just been through the ringer. So I know if you're on our Facebook fan page, The Gallery, a lot of people expressed a lot of concern because Brett's been sick for a long time. I don't think he's sick today, but guess who's sick? His dog. His dog has COVID. And what is happening to your house?
the dog does not actually have COVID. He has some sort of respiratory illness. It's unclear what it is. I'm sure it's not COVID. He is recovering nicely. But yes, it's been, you know how it is when your dog gets sick. They're a very whiny beast. So
Well, I didn't realize how bad it was. And just so you know, I didn't make that up. When I called Brett today to check on him, he said, my dog has dog COVID. And I was like, what? And then I didn't realize how bad it was until Mrs. Brett was like, yeah, we were up every couple of hours last night with the dog. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's very serious.
But he's fine. He just likes to complain. That's the thing. But we got him some medicine. He's downstairs quarantining, watching, television or something. But he's doing good. We're making it. So I appreciate everyone's concern. I feel great, by the way. So those of you who were worried that I was not going to make it, I feel great.
I actually am really glad you're finally healthy because I, along with all your fans, were really worried about you.
It was touch and go there for a bit, but for now, I'm sure in another week, who knows? You're
going to catch dog COVID.
Exactly. That would be my luck. I'll have dog COVID. Not real COVID, just dog COVID. But well, Alice, we're back this week to talk more about one of the really most intriguing and mysterious cases I think we've done, the Ellen Greenberg case. We gave you just a taste of it last week. We went through the timeline, some of the weird things about the timeline. We spent a lot of time with the stab wounds. So you just have a really good sense of how this woman died and how these wounds, well, maybe not how they were inflicted, but where they were inflicted and what that says about how they were inflicted. And today, over the next hour or so, we're going to dive even more into this. And the more details you learn about this case, the more unusual I think you are going to see this case as well, and hopefully you start to form some opinions about what must have happened here.
Absolutely, Brett. That when we ended recording last time, I had so much more. I mean, it was just the tip of the iceberg. I think the two of us kept talking for another hour, it seemed, afterwards, because this is a fascinating case. But we are going to try to demystify at least what the kind of public view of why the case is so confusing, because I think it gets less confusing when you look at the facts.
So last week we finished up with the wounds that were fatal, the wounds that killed Ellen. But those are not the only wounds that she had on her body. The autopsy revealed that Ellen had a large number of bruises, 11 bruises at least, on her right arm, abdomen, and right leg, in what the autopsy would describe as various stages of resolution. In other words, they didn't all happen at the same time, and they all couldn't have happened at the time of her death, since there wasn't much time between when she was stabbed and when she died. So take a moment to sort of take that in.
Yeah, so, I mean, Brett, what you just said there was pretty loaded. 11 bruises. Those 11 bruises were not inflicted at the same time. Those 11 bruises were not inflicted at the same time as the stab wounds. And they were in places that are probably not seeable when you wear clothes, and certainly not in winter. Remember, there was this big snowstorm coming through, and so it's winter, it's January. Usually you're wearing long pants, long shirts. And so the arm, the leg, and the abdomen are all places that could be covered up. And people interacting with you on a regular basis may not even know that you have almost a dozen bruises in those areas.
So let's talk about where the bruises were. Ellen had a 3x4 centimeter bruise on her upper right arm, a 3x1.5 centimeter area of 3 round bruises on her right forearm. So you sort of had an area on her right forearm where there are these 3 bruises all kind of grouped together, and you're going to see that more as we continue to walk through them. There was a 3x3.5 centimeter bruise on the right lower quadrant of her abdomen, a vertical row of round bruises of 2.5 by 3 centimeters, 4.5 by 3 centimeters, and 5 by 6 centimeters on her abdomen, which is, I mean, just think about that. Just a row of bruises as if they were made sort of one after the other. Above her right knee was a 4.5 by 3 centimeter area of 3 round bruises. Once again, like a grouping of bruises. Now, when you hear all these bruises, you might think, man, was she beat up? Maybe she was strangled. Her hyoid bone and her thyroid cartilage were intact, though I would note, given her age, she's only 26 years old, it actually probably is the case that even if she were strangled, her hyoid bone and her cartilage would be intact. It's sort of a myth that the hyoid bone always breaks in strangulation. It actually only happens about 30 to 40% of the time. And the younger you are, the less likely breakage is going to happen. As you get older, basically the bones in your throat, they start to calcify. They become more brittle. It's easier for them to be broken. So you usually see that actually in older individuals. So obviously, if her hyoid bone were broken, that would tell us a story. It's not. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. Now, obviously, these bruises, I mean, it looks like this lady was beat up, but as Alice said, in places that you wouldn't necessarily see. And just something to know, which may or may not be relevant in this case, oftentimes people who are abusive to others understand that, particularly in our current society, you can't just be punching people in the face. You know, if you're busting people's lips and you're blacking people's eyes, people are going to know about that and bad things are going to happen to you. So they're smart about it. When they abuse people, they actually tend to abuse them in places where it won't be seen, where it's easy to cover it up. Not saying that Ellen was being abused, but it is interesting the locations of these bruises, the way they're grouped together, the way they are, and as Alice mentioned, the fact that these didn't all happen at once. And even if she were attacked, even if she were brutally attacked, beaten up, and stabbed to death, these bruises didn't all happen that night. We know that for a fact. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 of them did, but they didn't all happen that night. So some of these bruises predate whatever it was that happened to her that night. This was obviously raised to the police and said, hey, what do you make of this? And they suggested, well, maybe it comes from contact sports. Those of you who play contact sports, you go out and play basketball with your friends or really anything where there's any kind of contact, you're going to have bruises. You know, you're going to look like you're beat up sometimes. The problem was, while Ellen at times had been involved in some sports, I think during college she'd played flag football. At the time of her death, she didn't really participate in any contact sports. She was into yoga. That's what she did, yoga. And I don't claim to be into yoga.
Which I do a good bit of yoga. You know, it is not uncommon, I guess, for me to have a bruise or two on my body, but not a dozen. And what I find really interesting is these are round. You know, obviously the way your body reacts to bruises is going to be different for each person, depends on the force used and whatnot. But the grouping and the location, Brett and I see a lot of pictures of victims if they've been assaulted or they've been hurt in some way. And this reminds me of someone who is grabbed very forcefully, like they're trying to leave the situation and you grab them around the waist. That's a very like power move, right? Usually when you're grabbing someone, it might just be the arm to say, hey, wait, I want to tell you something. Grabbing the waist, especially, I mean, she was a slim young woman and someone larger than her could control her from the waist quite easily. And it's kind of a power play too, because your abdomen is not a typical place for like a stranger to touch you. It's a very personal place. It's also more sensitive because it houses organs than, say, your arm that just has bone and muscle. So the presence of the bruises on the abdomen are particularly interesting to me because without contact sports, there's not a lot of occasion for those to occur in a pretty sedentary life in the sense that she's a teacher. She's not, a construction worker or someone who's lifting boxes at a factory all day where boxes may have to rest against your abdomen in order to hoist them up to the next level. She is in a school, sitting, standing, teaching, talking to students, not carrying heavy loads. And so that area is very interesting to me that she would have so many bruises there.
And there's a couple things that I find interesting about this. The first one, just to reiterate something you just said, if it were one or two bruises, then I think you could dismiss this. You could say, look, we don't know how they happened. Things happen in life. Who knows, right? But there are so many. And maybe these are all explainable in a completely innocuous way. One of them's from when a kid accidentally kicked her, and another one's when she ran into a table, and another one's from yoga or whatever. And I mean, maybe they can all be explained, but you got to do a lot of explaining. That's a lot of bruises, all spread out over a period of time. Not that great a period of time. It's not like bruises last forever, but over a period of time, probably a week, right? A bruise probably lasts about a week. The autopsy doesn't tell us a lot, which is one thing that's kind of unfortunate. I don't know how much it really could tell us, but a little bit more detail on the bruises would have been nice, but we have what we have. That's the first thing that's interesting.
And also, I'll note that this shows a pattern of conduct if it was inflicted by someone else. It's not a one-time thing. Otherwise, we would see all the bruises at one time. This suggests that it's something that happens regularly, probably on a daily basis. Let's say she gets this from an innocent thing like running into her countertop in her kitchen. That darn countertop always hits me at the same spot every day. You would have to believe that she runs into that countertop every day, 12 days in a row, 11 days in a row, hard enough to inflict a bruise in a similar place, but slightly different. And that happens. I run into my counter all the time, but not 11 days in a row with enough force to leave a bruise every single day.
And the second thing that's interesting, and this is not really connected to the bruises so much, it's just the case in general. What's really interesting about this case is there are no eyewitnesses to what happened. There are very few really witnesses, period. There's very little that people can tell us about what happened that day. This is really a mystery and a puzzle and a circumstantial thing in a way that's, I think, feels a little different from most of the cases we do. And we really are trying to put together a puzzle of what happened that day based on this disparate information. And we're starting with sort of the evidence from her body, the things we see from her body. And we're going to move from that into some other things as well. But just, we're mentioning these things. Don't assume that any of them mean anything. There's a lot of stuff we're going to talk about. It may mean something. It may be completely random. These bruises could all be completely random. And what you have to do when you're trying to figure out what happened, and what you have to do a lot of times in the law, when you're dealing with these kind of cases, is you have a piece of evidence, a single piece of evidence, which alone might mean something and might mean nothing. The bruises alone could mean someone's abusing her, could mean she's clumsy. And there's nothing in the bruises themselves that answer that question for you. We can't know based on that alone. So what you're going to have to do is keep that in your head. And as we look at all the rest, see if it fits or if it's something you can just throw away. And I think that's what we're going to have to do with all of this evidence as we sort of go through it. So the bruises, who knows how they happened. Now we're going to talk about some wounds that she didn't have.
Yeah, so we've talked about how intense and devastating these 20 stab wounds were, and then these 11 bruises in various stages of resolution around her body. So we've talked about a lot of wounds. But what we don't see and what we might expect to see if Ellen was attacked are defensive wounds. And she had no defense wounds at all. She had no wounds on her hand, and she has no signs. Usually you look under the nails, see if someone is trying to fight back. You might find DNA of someone else underneath the victim's nails because they're clawing back, trying to gain some sort of traction to fight back. A lot of stabbing victims, if they are being attacked, you'll see stab wounds on their hands because naturally our instinct is to put our hands up to our face to protect our more important bodily part, which is the brain and the face. And you'll see that the knives will cut into the hands when you instinctually put your hands up to defend yourself. And it's not even something you think about. That's why it's called instinct. So if Ellen were attacked, you would think that there'd be some sort of sign of her fighting back. But even the absence of any wounds on her hands is actually very unusual, regardless of whether she inflicted these stab wounds on herself or someone else attacked her. And that's because given the nature of the knife, remember it's a serrated kitchen knife with no guard on the handle to protect your hand, right? So think of a sword, like a samurai sword. There's usually there's the grip, and then there's like a flat, almost plate looking thing so that the blade has a stopper between your hand and the blade. And that's because a samurai sword is meant for stabbing. And when there's force, inertia, your hand's going to want to move forward unless there's something that stops it. Same with a kitchen knife. The kitchen knife is meant to kind of saw back and forth like on a steak. It's not meant for stabbing. And so therefore the steak knife doesn't have a guard on the end of the handle between the handle and the blade. And so if you were trying to stab yourself with enough force to go through your vertebra, to go through, your heart, to go through your scalp, you would expect that's a lot of force and that your hand would slip at some point in those 20 stab wounds and meet the serrated blade of the knife and cause wounds on your hand. And honestly, it's remarkable based on the number of stab wounds that Ellen had and the awkward manner in which she was stabbed. Remember, if she had stabbed the back of her neck, she would have had to reach behind her and with enough force to be able to force that knife into the back of her neck and head, that it's just remarkable that her hand never slipped from the handle and onto the serrated part of the blade to cut herself, to cause some wounds. So note that it's interesting she has no defensive wounds. Also interesting that she has no accidental wounds from the knife slipping if she were to have inflicted it on herself. Now, equally unusual is that Ellen could be stabbed in the chest and the back of the neck 20 times and just have nothing to show that she fought for her life. So all of this is very, very interesting, whether she stabbed herself or was stabbed by someone.
I think this is crazy. I mean, this is one of the craziest things about this case because I just got to tell you, the fact that she has no wounds on her hands is really weird to me. And it's so important. And this is a piece of evidence that often gets mischaracterized in other cases. So a person will have a cut on their hand and they'll say, or someone else will say, well, that's evidence that they fought back. But if you look at the cut, you realize, no, that's actually the knife slipping in their own hand. That's where that came from. If they fight back, a lot of times it's not a slashing wound, it's a stab wound, it's a puncture wound. It can be a slashing wound, but a lot of times if it's a slashing wound, you might see it slashing across several fingers, right? Whereas if you're holding a knife, just imagine you're holding a knife and you try and stab something multiple times and your hand slips up. Well, you're going to cut basically one, maybe two fingers, and you're going to cut it in a straight line. And you would expect to see that. It's just hard to imagine someone is stabbing themselves between their vertebrae. They're stabbing themselves into their skull. They're stabbing themselves in the chest with a steak knife. It's sharp. It cuts. It's not really meant to stab people with. And you're stabbing and you're pulling the knife out and stabbing and pulling the knife out 20 times. And that knife never slips and cuts your hand. It's crazy. I think that is crazy that didn't happen. But as Alice said, equally crazy, it's as if she were murdered, it's almost like she just kind of gave up. She was just stabbed and she fell to the floor. If you look at the autopsy, the stab wounds aren't very well described, but one thing that seems true is they're basically clean, kind of in and out, clean stab wounds. There's not a lot of movement in them, which kind of leads you to think this isn't a murder, because if it's a murder and you're moving and you're fighting back and you're trying to dodge the blade, the wounds are going to be more jagged. They're not going to be clean. They're going to be, I mean, you just think about it, right? If you're stabbing someone, there's going to be some of that damage that is going to be indicative of someone moving while they're stabbed. But you don't see that with her, which leads some people to believe that she's stabbing herself. But, I mean, it's a weird one. And this fact of no injuries on the hands, there has to be an explanation for that. Maybe it's just by some miracle she stabbed herself 20 times in the most awkward way possible, including into her skull, and the knife never slipped. Maybe. That doesn't seem right to me.
And, that's a great point about how clean the stab wounds are. When we went through the stab wounds, we talked about how there was movement from the left to the right to the left, etc. That is just movement. Like, you can imagine your hand kind of twisting of the wrist in order to pull the blade out. That's the type of movement we're talking about. We're not talking about, like, when you see slash wounds where someone's running and it awkwardly goes in one way and kind of twists inside their body because they're trying to get away. And here's the really interesting thing. Even if Ellen was being attacked and she gave up, so to speak, right? She was like, this is happening. I'm not going to fight back. That still wouldn't be what her wounds look like. Because what I said earlier, these motions are instinctual. You don't think about them. Even if you mentally gave up and weren't going to fight for your life, your body refuses to give up because your body wants to live. And naturally, you curl into a fetal position. Your hands go up. You can't help but fight for your life, right? Like, that's why it's really hard to drown yourself, say in just a bathtub, to stay underwater long enough, because your body fights against yourself and forces you to take in air. And that's why people do things like tie weights to themselves if they really want to drown themselves, because your nature takes over.
Yeah, it's really inexplicable. I have a theory for why it happened, but y'all are going to have to wait to hear that.
I really like your theory, and I think it's a good one, because when I knew this fact, I was like, I don't know. I have no idea what happened.
Just a teaser. I will have a theory for how this happened, but it's something. I mean, there's a reason for this, and I think it has to be tied to what happened, because Alice is 100% right. This would be instinctual. You would put your hands up. You just would. It's like if somebody throws a baseball at your face, you're not just going to stand there and watch it. You're going to put your hands up, even if you can't stop it, even if you're too late. It's like, why are there jump scares? Because you can't control that reflex. It's just natural, but we don't have it here, and it's crazy. So that's sort of the wounds that are on her body. That is the story that the autopsy can tell us. It's not much of a story. A lot of times, the entire story of a murder can be told in an autopsy. In this case, not so much. And you can kind of see why the pathologist, when they're looking at this, they're kind of going back and forth on it. They start with maybe it's a suicide, then it's a homicide, then later on they're going to change to suicide. And their interpretation of what they are seeing is going to be affected by things outside of the body, by facts that have nothing to do with what they're looking at. And so let's talk about some of those. We talked about Sam last week. Sam is Ellen's fiance. He went to the gym. He comes back and he finds Ellen dead. But before he finds her dead, he has some trouble. He's trying to get back into the apartment, and for whatever reason, Ellen or someone has engaged the bar lock. We talked about this before. This is not the deadbolt, okay? So it's not as if he can't open the door and doesn't have a key to unlock the deadbolt. This is the hotel-style bar latch that allows you to open the door maybe 3 inches. It's like replaces a peephole, right? You can open it about 3 inches. You can see somebody. It also replaces a chain lock. You can see who's out there, and then you can decide whether you want to open it. And the way you open it, you close the door, you flip the latch back, and then you can open the door. So he gets home, he uses his key, he opens the door, and you can just imagine, right? He opens the door, he pushes it open, and it's latched. It goes about 3 inches and then stops. He's just come from the gym. He's probably sweaty. He's probably tired. He's wanting to come inside, and all of a sudden he can't get inside. Now, there are a couple ways you might react to this if something like this happened. You might be worried. You might be concerned. What's going on? Or you might be angry. Well, we have the text messages that Sam sent to Ellen. He tried to call her a few times. He tried to call her name verbally a few times. He sent her some emails. We obviously don't know what he said when he called her or when he was yelling out for her, and we don't know what emails he sent her, but we do have the text. And here are the texts. Over a period of about 22 minutes, he sent these texts. He started at 5:32, ending at 5:54. The first text is, hello. Now, she doesn't respond to that text, so he follows up with, open the door. So far, so good, right? Then he says, what are you doing? Okay. Then he says, I'm getting pissed. Which, I mean, if you're not concerned, if your mind doesn't immediately go to concern, I can see this. You've been down to the gym. She knew you were going to the gym. She knew you were coming back. And now whatever she's doing, whether she's using the bathroom or taking a shower or taking a nap or on the phone with her mom, whatever she's doing, she's closed the door on you and you're now stuck, standing in the hallway like a moron, wanting to get in. So you're getting a little irritated. Hello is the next test. Now's where it gets a little questionable. The next one is, you better have an excuse. Okay. I don't really know what that means.
That's really, that's just an interesting phrase to jump to, right? But I'm getting pissed, and then the jumping to excuse. You're beginning to see a pattern of the way they speak to each other, actually, because that's not necessarily how everyone's conversation flows.
I mean, what if she doesn't have an excuse? What if she just made a mistake? What happens then?
And like, why does there need to be explanation, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it that you're mad. I'm not knocking him for being mad. I totally understand being mad. I would be irritated. Yeah, I absolutely would be irritated. I would not assume something was wrong. I would be irritated. I'd be like, what in the world? You know, I'm coming back. Why aren't you answering your phone? At some point, I would start to get concerned, right? And I guess actually, that's what's weird about this. I'm glad we're talking this through. I would start irritated, and then I would start getting concerned, right?
Yes. The initial, it would make way pretty quickly because remember, he saw her supposedly only 30 minutes ago. So, and she supposedly knows that he's just going down to the gym, which is within the building. This is not a situation where she thought he was going to work, maybe downtown. Maybe it's a 30-minute drive away. And so it gives her enough time to, I don't know, have another man over. You know, she knows he's in the building, not far away.
It's weird to me that there's no text asking if she's okay. I think at some point I would say, are you okay? I might even say something like, are you still alive in there? Now that would be sort of a joking one, right? But like, I would start texting I would start off kind of mockingly concerned and then be more concerned. Like that would happen at some point in my text. Now, not everybody's the same. Everybody always complains that we're trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes, but that's the way I would do it. But that's not what he does. He says that you better have an excuse, which tells me, by the way, that is the way they talk, as Alice said. I mean, this is a window in how they talk. When he gets upset, you better have an excuse. I mean, what does that mean? What the F is his next one? Which is weird. AHHH. Like,
it's almost juvenile, you know, like,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. It's like what a little kid does.
I think it would be ARG, wouldn't it? Shouldn't it be ARGH? But
That's
yeah,
what
I
I'm
think that's what
saying
he's
is
going for.
AHHH is like kind of juvenile as opposed to be, I don't know. It's a weird, it's like you're whining.
Yeah, and then he says, you have no idea. And like I said, I mean, these people from Philadelphia, you guys in Philadelphia are crazy. You throw batteries at Santa Claus and stuff like that. So who knows? Maybe this is the way people talk to each other. This is loving conversation in Philadelphia. I don't know. But to me, these last few texts are really concerning. And I don't want to overreact to a bunch of texts, but they're really concerning because they seem to present a certain dynamic in this relationship where she is expected to always be on the ball doing what he wants. And when she doesn't, he gets angry. And, you know, there's going to be consequences for this. I mean, that's what he's saying. There are going to be consequences. You better have an excuse. You have no idea. There are going to be consequences for the fact that she latched the door. However it happened, accidentally or not, she better get ready because whenever she does open that door, he's not just going to be irritated at her. He's going to be pretty mad. Now, what that means with their relationship and him, I have no idea. But it's pretty clear to me that he is pretty rage-filled by this point.
But here's also what's interesting. If these texts are a cover-up that he had stabbed her before he left, and he knew that she was dead on the inside, why would you send texts like this that show your rage? Why wouldn't you send staged texts that show what a concerned and loving and caring boyfriend you are? So that's also really confusing to me, that there would be these texts if in fact he's staging them, right? Instead of sending like, what the F, and you have no idea and you better have an excuse, they are kind of threatening texts. I would probably say something along the lines of, hey baby, are you in there? I'm really getting worried now. The door's locked from the inside. I can't get in. Please answer me. If you're on the phone, give me a sign. Let me know. I'm just kind of getting freaked out here. You know, it's something to show that you're a loving, caring boyfriend.
It's a fantastic point. And it's one that I feel like is missed a lot of times in the conversation about this. People talk about the anger of these texts, but they don't seem like the kind of text you would send if you had just murdered someone and you're trying to cover it up. They don't feel like that. They feel real. And they fit. I think when we get to theories, I think there are basically three possible theories in this case. They fit one of them, but maybe not the other two. Unless he's just really bad at faking it, right? But
and one other thing to think about is that Sam and Ellen are going to likely have a lot of texts between them. And if anyone were to look at either of their phones, there's probably going to be a long history of texts. And perhaps this is in line with how he normally talks to her. And if he were to switch up how he talks to her, maybe that would be more concerning than if he spoke to her how he always speaks to her.
And it's kind of like a lot of what we've been talking about. It's really hard taken in isolation to figure out what this means and what's going on, because we just don't have enough information. We don't have enough information about the way they did talk to each other. This is a little off topic, and if I've told this story before, you can stop me, Alice, but my criminal law professor, who's Alan Dershowitz, used to tell a story about how he had a guy who, a police officer was basically framing this guy. The police officer was involved in some shady dealings and some drug dealings, and he had framed one of the people who was also involved, so that guy would take the fall. And there was a third guy who the defense had found who was kind of their inside man. And so they wired this guy up, and they sent him in to record a conversation with this cop. So they go in, this dude is recording this conversation where the cop is saying all sorts of incriminating stuff. And so then they come back, and the tape is really bad, and they can only hear part of what's on the tape. And so they ask the guy, they transcribe it basically, and there are gaps. And so they asked the guy who was there, fill in what's in the gaps for us. Because what they were going to do, the cop was going to be on the stand, they were going to confront him with this conversation. And so what Dershowitz wanted to be able to do is he wanted to say, did you tell Johnny H, X, Y, and Z, right? And then see the cop's reaction. And so this guy, Johnny, we'll use Johnny because that works. Johnny sits down with a transcript and he starts writing in what they said. And when they read what he wrote in, it was completely different from everything else, because everything else had like F-bombs in it and all sorts of coarse language. And then what he wrote in was very nice and proper. And they were like, no. You have to write exactly what he said. Don't be embarrassed. Write exactly what he said, because nobody's going to buy this, that he said this. And so the second time, the guy sat down and he wrote it actually what they said, with all the coarse language and the F-bombs and everything else. And then when they confronted the cop with it, it worked really well. And maybe it is something similar here, like Alice is saying, that he knew if all of a sudden he's all lovey-dovey in his text, and he's never like that, that would be a problem for him. And that would give him a reason to basically text her the same way he always did.
Some of you may think, well, he could have just deleted her texts. I think if they looked at his and her phones and all the texts had been deleted, that would also draw attention to him. So if he didn't want to show how he talked to her before. So I think he couldn't delete all the previous texts if he was staging this. And this does feel true to maybe how he talked to her. Like, why would he, if he usually talks loving, all of a sudden talk really pissed off, right? Especially right before Ellen is found dead. So I think there is a possibility that he knows that there can't be no text between them. They can't be deleted or wiped. And also, he probably always talks to her this way.
Maybe he was smart enough to know that if he sent her really mean text messages, everybody would say, well, he would never do that. If he was faking it, he wouldn't send mean text messages. It just really depends on how much. If you're staging a murder, how well are you thinking it through? Right? I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question. And it's one you have to tackle here, because either this is a suicide or a staged murder. I mean, really, those are the only options. There's a third option we're going to talk about, but those are really the most likely options.
And we have to analyze these texts because these texts are happening on the other side of the door where Ellen is dead, right? And so this is as she either lay dead or lay dying. And unlikely while he was sending these texts, the stabbing was happening because he probably could have heard things because remember, the door can be ajar and he didn't hear anyone being stabbed or anyone trying to get away or any struggle.
And look, this case is uncomfortable in one big way, and I think we should go ahead and talk about it. Sam could be a perfectly innocent person who suffered an incredibly tragic loss and is a victim as much as Ellen and has had to deal with the fact that his fiancée, who he loved, killed herself for reasons he can't understand months before they were going to get married. That is 100% possible. And yet, in talking about her case, you have to talk about him and you have to analyze him. And this is just a difficulty in true crime. It just is. And people get all squishy about it sometimes and squeamish about it. But if you're looking for truth, sometimes there are hard questions you have to ask, and sometimes you have to ask hard questions of people who may be perfectly innocent. In fact, most of the time, in any investigation into any crime, there are going to be times, quite often, where an innocent person is mixed up in it somehow, and you have to ask them tough questions. And that's how you figure out that they are an innocent person, and you move on. And that's pretty much every case. And it's unfortunate that Sam has to deal with this, but the fact of the matter is, as we've said before, this is an ongoing case. It's an ongoing investigation. We're going to talk about how it's an ongoing investigation as we go, but this is not a cold case, and it's not a case that's over, and this is not a witch hunt. These are the questions that people are going to have to answer if they're going to figure out what happened to Ellen.
Hello there, my name is Allison Dixon, and I like the dark. For many years, I've applied this love to writing horror and thriller fiction, but with my new podcast, Ding Dong Darkness Time, I relish the opportunity to explore the shadowy corners of real life, but in an accessible and friendly way. Each season of the show is a deep dive on a particular topic, with various special guests along for the ride. One such guest was actually Brett from The Prosecutors. Season 1 explored multiple haunting aspects of the arts. Season 2 covered the works of Stephen King. The upcoming Season 3 will be all about cults. Future seasons also include gangsters, morbid Hollywood, death rituals, true crime, and so much more. And sprinkled throughout the seasons is a variety of short takes on the strange and unusual, such as morbid slumber party games, harrowing stories from military history, and even murder at the karaoke bar. Suffice it to say, if you've ever read a news story that made you go WTH, it'll likely land on my show at some point. So head on over to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and check out Ding Dong Darkness Time. And as I always like to say, be good, you little ding-dongs.
The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Okay, let's move on with some of the other things we know about the scene. Let's talk about DNA. Now, the knife was tested for DNA, which is actually shocking, Brett, because the scene was cleaned like the day after. I can't even believe that happened. But thankfully, they kept the knife and they did test it for DNA. And only Ellen's DNA came back. So no one else's DNA was found on the knife. Now, if someone, including Sam, ever touched it, and by the way, I don't think it would be that surprising if Sam's DNA was found on this knife, because he lived in this apartment and this was like a regular kitchen knife that was probably used by both of them. So I just want to throw it out there. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Sam's DNA was actually on here. Now, it's possible that someone did touch the knife and no DNA was left behind. That can happen. It's not like slime that you see a trail of it everywhere it goes. DNA testing has gotten much better and gets better every single day, but you have to leave behind something to be picked up for testing. Or we've all watched movies, TV. There are ways to keep your DNA off things like knives, right? You can wear a glove, you can hold a dishcloth, you could wipe it down to wipe off prints. That is not an uncommon strategy to make sure your DNA is not left behind. But all we know for sure here is that only Ellen's DNA came back as a positive on the knife.
And we've talked about this 1,000 times, and we're not going to belabor the point. DNA, it's not as ubiquitous as you think it is. Like Alice said, this cuts both ways. It could be unusual that Sam's DNA is not on the knife. He's living in that apartment. It's not on there. Maybe that indicates the knife is cleaned. This wouldn't be hard to do at all. The knife is sticking out of her chest. Wipe the knife down. Put her hand on the knife. Then you got fingerprints and you got DNA. So to me, this doesn't tell us a lot. Now, obviously, if someone else's DNA were on the knife, that would be significant. The fact that it's not is a slight point towards suicide as opposed to murder, but a very slight one. Certainly not a slam dunk. Certainly doesn't push me one way or the other.
And one thing to note about this knife, you guys can take a look at the picture of it. I mean, it's just a picture, so I can't totally verify what type of a grip it is, but there seems to be some like knobs that stick out. It is not a smooth mirrored surface. And the fact that there are different kind of gradations of the handle mean it's going to be harder to find DNA on it. We've talked about this a lot. Guns, really hard to lift prints off of them because guns actually have, like webbing's not the right word, but it's not a smooth surface. They're usually gripped. And because of that, it's hard to lift clean fingerprints off guns. Here too, this is not like a mirrored surface of a knife. And so it doesn't really surprise me that it's possible to have touched the knife and not left any DNA. Now, if the theory is that Ellen did not inflict those stab wounds on herself, it would mean someone else did. And one theory, of course, is that it was an intruder. Someone who was not Sam, someone came in and stabbed her while he was gone for that short window. If that were the case, you may expect to find signs of an intruder, and there were none. Neighbors would later say that other than the sound of Sam banging on the door when he came back from the gym, they heard nothing. Now, the snow on the 6th floor balcony where their apartment was also undisturbed. So if the door was locked, it's possible that someone had come from the balcony. But because remember, there was this big snowstorm, you would expect to see, especially within like a 30-minute, 40-minute, maybe 1-hour window, you would probably expect to be able to see snow disturbed from the person escaping out another point of entry. So no one had come in from the outside. Nothing in the apartment was taken, including valuables that were in plain sight, such as Ellen's engagement ring, which was sitting on the table in her bedroom. So nothing's missing. Usually if it's an intruder, they may be coming in for something like an easy snatch, and maybe they're caught unawares that someone's actually in the apartment and they panic and they kill the person. But usually you'll find that they'll take something, whatever is easiest within eyesight, to make their time worth it. But we don't see anything missing, and we don't see any signs of someone coming in from the balcony, nor do the neighbors say they heard anything upstairs.
So if this were an intruder, and that's option 3, if it were an intruder, they weren't there for valuables, and they managed to basically slip in and slip out without anybody knowing. And they didn't come in through the 6th floor balcony. They didn't climb up in a blizzard like Spider-Man and come in through the balcony. If they came in through that door. They were probably let in by Ellen. They would have done what they did and then left. And it's not something where anybody heard a big struggle. Big Man Tree Crime. She actually looked into the complaints about the building to see whether or not the walls were thin, and found that was not a complaint, which I thought was just brilliant investigation on her part. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there couldn't have been something that happened in that building and in that room and nobody heard it on the outside. It wasn't like you'd have to be completely silent because the walls are so thin. So maybe there is an intruder, but if they did it, they didn't do it to steal anything, and they did it basically without any indication that they were there.
And it would be interesting because an intruder is more likely to surprise you. She probably wouldn't be surprised to see Sam come in because Sam lives there and she knows that he just went downstairs to the gym. But if you saw someone come into your apartment or noticed someone behind you who did not belong in your apartment, you would expect to see those defensive wounds, right? A scream, hands up to the face, what have you. But again, we go back to the 0 defensive wounds that were found on her body.
And I want to ask you this, Alice, and you can tell me what you think. Somebody can complain that we're interjecting our own how we would behave, but is it weird to you that her engagement ring was sitting on the table in her bedroom?
So this is a little bit hard because it's not the end of the night. I can imagine if you're getting ready for bed, like washing your face, taking a shower. I typically do not take off my engagement ring at all in general in life. But if I were maybe at the end of the night, and the other time though would be washing the dishes. But one thing I will note, if I'm washing the dishes and say I'm doing like a heavy cast iron pot or pan and it can scratch because it's a heavy metal, I take my ring off and put it right next to the sink. I don't walk into my bedroom to put it in my bedroom because I usually don't think that far ahead that I'm in my bedroom to put it down in order to go wash a dish. It's like as I'm washing a dish, I look down, I'm like, oh, I don't want to scratch, the pan or my ring. So it's a little bit strange to me, but everyone is different on how they wear their engagement rings. But one thing I'd like to know, there may be some indications that she was doing something at the sink. So this might not be that surprising if she is like me and may not want her ring to get soap on it or, to get cloudy with all the debris from washing dishes, because in the kitchen, there was a strainer of blueberries next to a peeled orange. And this is on the kitchen counter. And it appears that she had been preparing a fruit snack or a fruit salad at the time that she was attacked or when she decided to stab herself. The existence of the fruit leads me to believe it's more likely she was attacked than she decided to stab herself, because kind of like what we were saying last episode with her calling a restaurant and her calling her mom and nothing seemed amiss when she was speaking to her mom, is that she was making plans for the future and acting in a way that would anticipate she would see another hour, another day. Same with these blueberries and a peeled orange. You usually peel an orange right before you eat it. You wash blueberries typically right before you eat them because they're delicate. And so it would be a little bit strange to take these steps to prepare fruit to eat and then all of a sudden fly into such a rage of wanting to end your own life that you're able to stab through your scalp and your vital organs. So the existence of this fruit just seems to point to being caught surprised.
So I'm going to take issue, Alice. We're about to have a disagreement.
Take issue away. Oh no.
I do not think it is a little strange. I think it is inexplicable that you see this. I mean, this to me is just wild. And I'll repeat what I've said in the past about suicide. People who are making plans for the future decide to kill themselves. It happens. And it seems strange to those of us who have not had suicidal thoughts, have not dealt with depression, have not dealt with suicide. It seems strange to us that people would fill up their gas tank and then go home and kill themselves, or that they would make reservations at the restaurant and then kill themselves. That is one thing. It is another thing altogether to apparently be standing at the sink, washing blueberries, peeling an orange, and then just deciding to pull a knife out of the knife block and stab yourself 20 times to death and die in the kitchen. I mean, that is a level beyond anything that I have ever heard or seen. And if people have other stories of similar things happening like that they know of, I would love to hear them, because to me, that is so unusual and so unique that it almost forecloses suicide for me. Like, it is just hard for me to wrap my head around. As you said, you peel an orange right before you eat it. You don't peel an orange and then just leave it on the counter. You just don't do that. And you're straining the blueberries. You're about to eat the blueberries. That's why you do that. And it it is difficult for me to wrap my head around the notion that you would be in the middle of doing that. And the reason I say in the middle of doing that is because those things are sitting essentially right in front of where she would have been standing when she stabbed herself. The knife block is right next to them. She would have pulled that knife out of that knife block, standing right in front of the blueberries and the orange, and then stabbed herself in the back of the neck, and then in the stomach, and then in the chest. And I really have a hard time with that.
Yeah, that it's, you know me, I understate everything. Which is really funny because when you meet me in real life, I'm like over the top. But,
and I may overstate everything. I may be making too much out of this. It's just, of all the things in this case, this was the first thing. Because I went into this thinking, like I usually do. I mean, people they'll send us things and be like, oh, I think this person's innocent. And I'll look at it for 5 minutes and be like, they're totally not innocent. We're not even going to waste their time with this. And people will send us things with cases where, is it a suicide? Is it murder? And I'll look at it and I'll be like, look, I'm not going to re-traumatize this family with another episode on this. This is clearly a suicide. Somebody sent us this one and I started looking at it. And man, when I got to the fruit, I just thought, this is weird. This was the thing more than really anything else up to this point, including the stab wounds and how weird they are and where they are and everything else. But when I got to the fruit, I just thought, this is weird.
You want to know why I really think it's weird? Now people are going to be like so angry that I insert my own thoughts. I love blueberries, right? Blueberries are like delicate. It's winter. You don't have a ton of blueberries. And the reason you wash them right before you eat them is because they're very susceptible to spoiling. And so when you wash them, it kind of, you get rid of all the pesticides and things that have kept it good on the shelf. And so you're supposed to wash them and eat them right away as opposed to store them because they go bad as soon as you start washing them. And I just think about like, it's hard for me to not eat blueberries as I'm washing them because I'm like, oh, I just love blueberries. Right. Like they're right
exactly.
here.
No, 100%. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, maybe I am dwelling on a strange thing, but to me, this fruit, and this is where we're going to end for today. We're going to end on the fruit. So, like I said, I want to hear from people. I want to hear from people about whether they have ever heard of any case like this. And there are some strange suicide stories out there, but Alice is right. You would wash those blueberries and then eat them. You'd be eating the blueberries as you went. And by the way, her stomach's empty. There's nothing in her stomach. So if she was exercising restraint, apparently, and not eating the blueberries as she was washing them, it really feels like she's making herself a snack. You can sort of imagine how this would go, right? She's hungry. She hasn't eaten anything. Her fiance is going to go to the gym, so she's making herself a snack. When he gets back from the gym, they're going to order dinner. That's the way things go, right? I mean, that would make sense. And it just feels like she's in the middle of making this snack and she dies. She's either murdered or she kills herself in the middle of washing blueberries.
Kind of feel like that's a good place to end just because it's so bizarre.
It's so bizarre. It's totally bizarre. And I need input from people. So
I do
wanted
too.
people to give me input on this.
And also, I'm just really hungry for blueberries now.
Yeah, there you go. You have to go get you some blueberries. You maybe go pick blueberries once, I believe.
I did, and you loved it.
I picked a lot of blueberries. I made a lot of muffins, and I ate a lot of
delicious.
blueberries. It was delicious. They're not exactly fun to pick. But in any event, we want to hear from you guys on the blueberries and everything else. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Hello to those of you watching on YouTube. You'll see a lot of pictures of the various things we've been talking about. Hello to those of you listening to this early and ad-free on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting us. We know that, especially these days, every dollar you make has to go a long way. And so the fact that you decide to put a little towards us is just blows our mind. Still can't believe anybody listens to us at all, but certainly that anybody pays to listen to us is crazy. So thank you guys. I hope that you're enjoying this. Let us know what cases you want to hear because we always want to do for you. Well, Alice, before we sign off for tonight, is there anything else you want to add?
This case is maddening. It's so interesting. It's so maddening. The facts are just mind-boggling. And please come back because we didn't get through as much as I thought we would, but that's just because there's so much to discuss. And I think it's worth discussing because of what Brett said. This is not a cold case, despite how old it is. And I don't think there's been justice yet in this case, and I think it deserves a hard look at the facts, and that's what we're trying to do here.
And I think that's 100% right. I mean, we are going through this methodically because each one of these things is worth discussion. I mean, this is, like I said, if you want to get the 45-minute version, which will basically tell you everything you need to know, listen to Big Mad True Crime, and then you can come listen to us, waste your time. But everything in this case is interesting and worthy of discussion and means something in the final calculus of what happened here. So we're going to continue to do that. I'm fascinated by this case. I find this case to be absolutely riveting, and I hope you guys do too. We have a lot to talk about. Next week, we probably will get to the 911 call in this case, which is one of the most interesting 911 calls you're ever going to hear. And I say this as someone who constantly cautions you not to put that much stock into 911 calls. Listen to this 911 call, and I think you'll hear what I'm talking about. But we will be back next week, and we will discuss this case more. Cannot wait to hear your thoughts and comments on this case. But until we do, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. I guess you could never find somebody guilty in a no body case.
Yeah.
You know, you could have the guy on tape kidnapping the person, taking them into a room, walking out with clearly a bag and a body, a video of them getting on a boat, dumping the body in the ocean. The body's never found. You didn't find. We don't know how they died. Maybe they strangled him. Maybe they shot him. Maybe they stabbed him. We need to know. We need to know how they died. Like, no, you don't.
No, not at all. I'm too tired.
And this is literally what they said. Obviously, every right-thinking person on this planet knows Casey is guilty and that she played at least some part in her daughter's death. But they say this after saying the jury absolutely got this one correct, in my opinion. It's like, what does that mean? Like, I do not understand.
If you know that she's guilty, then she's
guilty.
All this month, stream the funniest films for free on Pluto TV. Watch comedy classics like Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and Mean Girls. Or drop in for a Tyler Perry marathon with a Medea family funeral and Medea's witness protection. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Get Shorty, Be Cool, Key and Peele, Comedy in Color, and more. And no contracts, no subscriptions, no fees, no joke. So download the Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start laughing today. Pluto TV, drop in, watch free.